Hey everybody, good morning, Egg here. So the 500 crystal relic packs just came back to the game this morning, and I know that your first question is, hey Egnards, didn't you already cover this topic? And the answer is yes, I did. It was actually one of the first videos that I ever produced from a math perspective. And if you really want a good laugh, go back and take a look at it, because it's just hilarious watching me trying to figure out all of the ins and outs of sources and changing things, and it's embarrassing to say the least, but the information was good. So we're going to do a little bit of a redo of version 2, if you will, that includes more information to kind of help you guys make those decisions on your own. But the good news is that we do have a TLDR, right? So if you don't want to spend the next half hour listening to me drone on, you absolutely don't have to. Really, the best practice and the first thing that you need to understand is that the only two packs that really are complete shit and absolutely not worth buying are the Aurodium Heatsinks and the Chromium Transistors. Pretty much everything else, if you need it, it's safe. We'll talk about why and everything as we go on through the video. We also have our own resident Moonborn, who has taken this information that I've put together, and he has put together an infographic. And I know that I'm just kind of scrolling through this really quickly, but you'll be able to find this probably on Reddit as well as on our Discord server if you just want to look at the information on your own. So, without further ado, let's talk about it. Number one, carbonate circuit boards, right? Do you farm them? Do you buy them? I personally always buy these. I never farm them. It's not worth my time. Okay, we look at the carbonate circuit boards, we see that if we start talking about crystal refreshes, and it's important to keep in mind that you definitely don't have to crystal refresh. You could feasibly only use free energy. But when we're talking about crystal refreshes, the 500 relic pack is the most economical overall. Let me just explain this chart for a little bit. It's actually going to go through, and it's going to be the same for all of the relic packs. But what we're going to see on the left side here is what it basically costs to farm something, whether it's at a 500, at a 50 crystal refresh, whether it's at a 100 crystal refresh. We're going to talk about the cost of getting it if you get it directly from shipments. We're going to talk about it if we see it as one of the better deals in the daily deals. Now, these daily deal packs, they're entirely based off of what I've personally seen and what I've personally witnessed through screenshots either on Discord that people have sent me or through Reddit. So you might watch this, you might look at this and say, hey, wait a second, I saw a better deal. I can only go off of the information that I've been given. And then we're talking about the 500 crystal pack EV, or the expected value. And that essentially means that while the cost basis might not be 3.125 every single time you roll the pack, if you do buy the pack pretty consistently, our average over time is going to fall into that range. On the right side, we're going to just see those base drop rates, right? So what we're going to get, the lowest pack, 100 carbonate circuit boards, cost basis of 5, right? Which is basically exactly the same as going to a direct shipment versus getting that 300 at cost basis of 1.67, which is much cheaper, and one of the best ways, or one of the best packs you can get if you get lucky on that 5% hit. And then finally, we do have our farming strategies. And for carbonate circuit boards, it really is Lightside 1C. Lightside 1C provides, if I remember correctly, it's about 14.4 carbonate circuit boards per 120 energy spent, or per 50 crystals spent. So if you're looking to farm these while the packs are not around, not a terrible idea. Lightside 1C. But going back to this, if we look at our carbonate circuit boards, that 500 crystal pack is actually one of the most economical things that you can do in this game. I have literally never farmed these things. It's just not worth my time. Anytime these packs do come around, I look at my stash of circuit boards and I try to buy myself up to 1,000. And sometimes that means that I don't need to buy any. I'm a little bit over. I haven't reliced anything over the last month. I don't have to worry about it. And sometimes I have to buy 6 packs because I've spent so much over the last month buying different characters. Because this pack comes around about every month, 1 to 1.5 months, I don't feel like I'm in a terrible crunch to have to consistently pull more and more and more and more of them. I've found that 1,000 mark is perfect for me, and I've never run out doing that. Okay, so for me personally, great value. I don't recommend farming them. That's just how it is. Moving on to our Bronzium Wirings. This one is decisive. This is one that people often say, don't buy the packs, it's not worth it. And I disagree. I think that what ends up happening is because we look at this jump, right, where our bottom pack goes from 100 to 25, that people do get a little bit scared about buying the pack itself. But the reality is that when we look at these cost bases, the daily deal and the EV on that 500 crystal pack are essentially the best way to get this item if it's the only thing that you need, right? Important to note with the daily deal that when we talk about the cost basis, we are talking about specifically for the primary item, which is the Bronzium Wiring. Typically, these types of packs will also offer a few other items. Sometimes they're things that you might absolutely not need. Sometimes they're things that you might need, but you maybe weren't ever going to buy. And sometimes they're just really small quantities of useful things like signal data. So there is a little bit extra built into those daily deals if those are the ones that if the game is offering you. One really cool thing to note though with the farming strategy on the Bronzium Wirings is that LS7B, which is the shock prods, the Kyrotech shock prod node, is going to offer you 2 items for Bronzium Wirings, as well as a crafting item for the Chromium Transistor. The Chromium Transistor is not going to be a huge concern for us, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But those Bronzium Wiring pulls, one of them I believe gives 10 per pull, and the other I think is one of the smaller 2 per pull, has allowed me as an end game player to not really have to worry about buying Bronzium Wirings for a while, because I'm constantly farming Kyrotech shock prods as it is. I'm often getting those green items, which the MK5 Fabritech datapad, I believe, is the one that's going to offer you 10 points per 1 drop, and those drop in quantities of 2. So the TLDR here is that while I do think that these are a value, and I have purchased them in the past, as you start to get to a point in the game where you're constantly buying shock prods, you maybe aren't going to have to worry about this as much. But now let's talk about Chromium Transistors. You notice I've actually grayed out or redded out a lot of the different things for the Chromium Transistor. And the reason why is that it's just not worth ever having to buy for crystals. There are a couple farming strategies that really do help. Number one, that LS7B that we were just talking about in the last thing for Bronzium Wirings is going to give you the MK7 BAW Armor Mod prototype salvage. And that salvage is something that crafts pretty consistently and easily with another green item in order to give you 150 points towards Chromium Transistors. But there's an even easier hack for getting these, which is the fully crafted MK7 Blast Tech weapon mods that are purchased with guild tokens. So I actually want to kind of pull up my phone and take a look at this, right? I was lucky enough in-game today that it did pull up in my store so that I could film this and show it to you as well. And you can see I have so many of these Chromium Transistors just because of this guild tokens hack, whatever you want to call it, right? So we go over here, we hit up our shipments, guild activity. We scroll down and we're going to see it right there. What is that? Is that slot 13, 4, 8, 12? So slot 13, MK7 Blast Tech Weapon Mods. These are fully crafted. You get 10 of them for 150 guild tokens. We take those back over to the scavenger. We pop over to our Chromium Transistors, and I have 11,000 of what are these? This is the uncrafted prototype for that bow armor mod that we were talking about before. Let's switch this up to our value, and there we are, boom, right? Just 10 of these bad boys, which is what you're going to get from that thing in the store, is going to net you 33 Chromium Transistors. In the short term, if you didn't already know about this trick, it can take a couple of weeks to build up a considerable hoard where you don't feel limited by this item anymore. But it is something that is going to appear rather frequently in the shipments. It is not something that you are going to see every day, but it is something that if you check your store at every refresh, you'll probably on average see every other day or so, and it will give you enough once you've moved past whatever your initial hurdle is, right? So that's just something really important to keep in mind with the Chromium Transistors so that you're not wasting your crystals. The second one that we want to talk about that really should never be a buy is the Aurodium Heatsinks, right? Directly from shipments, they cost 100 crystals per unit. The 500 crystal packs brings that EV down to 45.45. But the reality is that if you do need these in a pinch, what you can do is buy MK3 hollow projectors from the weekly store. And I think maybe the regular shipment store as well. And you can craft those over as fully crafted items, which will provide a cost basis of just 30, which is probably the better and more consistent way to do that. You'll see that that is in the weekly shipments for 150 crystals. It's the best crystal cost. You'll see them in the guild token store. And then we also have Lightside 9F. And Lightside 9F is a pretty nice node because it's one going to give you items for your impulse detectors, but it's also going to give you the MK3 Scener hollow projector salvage for the Aurodium Heatsinks. And remember, you're going to want to craft those into the full hollow projectors instead of directly salvaging them so that you get a higher value. And then once again, the biotech implant component is going to give you additional chromium transistors, but hopefully in a couple of weeks, that's not something that you're going to have to worry about once you've used the chromium transistor hack that we have going on to make your life a hell of a lot easier. Now, this is where things get a little bit harder with the Electrium Conductors. This is something more towards the end of the game, and you're looking at R6 and beyond. And a year and a half ago, most players were not bringing most of their relics past Relic 5, only doing that for key characters. But of course, because of the raid, because of ROTE and TB, we've kind of been stuck in a spot where we do have to consistently do higher relics. This is a pack that I find myself purchasing fairly often. I feel a lot less limited by my Zinbiddle Cards and above, and more limited by Electrium Conductors. So often this is something that I am going to purchase. You can farm them on Lightside 9E, which is going to give you those Electrium Conductors as well as Chromium Transistor Craft. You can farm them for a similar amount on Darkside 9C. And now, what I didn't mention earlier is that when we talk about farming strategies and places to farm these things, we are looking at some of the better nodes in the game for a higher consistent overall value to get both that item, but also get something else. You will find this for raid currency, which we will talk about in its own little segment towards the end. And you can get this for MK3 Guild Event tokens. Now, this is where we start to talk about where should we use our raid currency. Do we use it on Electrium Conductors? Do we use it on Zinbiddles? Do I use it on the keypads? Again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later in its own thing, so hang tight. I did not forget about it. Zinbiddle Cards, you'll notice that the daily deal is missing. This just happens to be because so far, scrolling through Discord, scrolling through Reddit, scrolling through Google, asking my own Discord server and my own game as well, I have yet to find this as a premium item or as the primary item in a daily deal for 3,200 crystals. I'm sure that it exists. I don't see a reason for it not to, but I don't have that information. But we do see that 500 crystals per pack as the expected value at 78.125 crystals is a relatively low cost or a barrier to entry versus the direct shipment cost, which is almost double. We do have quite a few places or quite a few ways that we can procure these. Fleet 3A is going to give you things for Zinbiddle Cards, Carbonite Circuitboards, as well as Bronzium Wirings, and Fleet 3C is going to give you a very, very similar return on investment. Once again, we do have our raid tokens and our guild event tokens, which we will be talking about in just a little bit. Impulse detectors are one that is kind of neat. You are going to see it as a relatively nice value at the EV of the 500 crystal pack at 113 crystals. But once we talk about relicking every little thing and buying all of these packs, it can be hard to make a decision on what you want to get at certain times. The daily deal at 3,200 crystals gives us a higher cost basis of 160, but it on its own is cheaper crystal-wise than you can buy them in direct shipments, and often there are other goodies in that pack. I typically find those to be a buy for the mid-game player. As a late-game player, I do not find myself limited by impulse detectors anymore and have personally stopped buying them. Lightside 9F is a really great place to farm the impulse detectors because you're going to get impulse detectors as well as Aurodium Heatsinks through not the most engaging item. You're going to get Aurodium Heatsink crafts, Carbonite Circuitboards from 2 different items, and then once again we have our raid tokens and our guild event tokens. Aeromagnifiers a little bit tougher. This is something for players who were in Challenge Rancor very early on the game, not in the game, but who capitalized on Challenge Rancor when it first came to the game are still probably going to find themselves with a relatively big stash of Aeromagnifiers. I personally have about 330 of them left, and I am dreading the day when I no longer have those available to me because I know that these can be a pain in the ass to farm. The good news is that we can get them from Duel of the Fates now, so at least I'll have a passive income farm once I get those 2 characters up to R9. The bad news is that because of the way the game is going and because of how many you're going to need, I do recognize that I'm probably going to have to buy these in the future. Obviously, we see at direct shipment cost, we're getting about a cost of 250 crystals, and we see a considerable drop on that when we talk about the EV on those packs. At 113 crystals per. There really is no other way to get these outside of those 2 areas, as well as MK3 raid tokens. CG has not opened up the floodgates on this one for us yet. Here's to hoping, right? And then finally, I know that these are not available in the 500 crystal packs, but when we talk about Gyrda Keypads, I know that they become very important, especially for those GL grinds. So I did want to just throw this up on the screen. We see that farming these at a 50 crystal refresh, we're going to see pretty much the same cost basis as if we were going to buy them from a direct shipment. We might get just slightly lower. And Fleet 2E seems to be the best node to do this on because although the cost basis for the Gyrda Keypads themselves are relatively the same as direct shipment, you are also getting multiple ways to get Bronzium Wirings, which are an item of high demand as we consistently move through the relic requirements of the game. Once again, we have our MK3 raid tokens and our MK3 guild event tokens. One thing that I do want to go back to add before we talk about raid and guild is back on these Electrium Conductors. There are multiple ways to go about scavenging for these items. There are items, well, actually let's just pull it up and I'll show you. There we go. So we're here. Everybody can see my phone password. There we go. So we look at the Electrium Conductor and we see that there are 3 levels of farms here. We have that base level at 15 each. We have the 450 level, and then we have the 1050 level. It's really important to note that these 450 crafted items are exactly the same as these piecemeal items with the salvage. If I salvage the 30 that I need, I'm going to get that same 450. These 1050s are a little bit different. You're going to see a slightly increased value, and it's not because of these gold items that you can salvage on their own. It's because there are some items here, these purple items, that cannot otherwise be salvaged at all, but do get added into these pieces, which are accounted for. So technically, these are worthwhile to convert if you don't need them, but keep in mind that if we're talking specifically on an item-to-item basis, it honestly is exactly the same. You can see I have about 500 of these Nubian design techs, so for me, it might be worth it to wait, whereas if those are items that I need, okay, not as worth it. These CEC fusion furnaces, I have 900 of them, so it might be worth it for me to wait for these 1050s to get a little bit of an increased value. So from here, let's actually talk about those raid and guild strategies. There we go. So you see that I have this table broken down into raid tokens and guild event tokens and the costs associated with both. And people on Reddit, when I did this with my version 3 data sheet about 6 months ago, had asked me, hey, Egnards, what is the best thing to be getting for raid tokens or guild tokens? And what's the conversion? And how do we figure this out? And how do we bring the crystals into that? And what's going to give me the best deal? And I'm going to be honest with you, I have no idea because there really is no math to make it a comparison here. We can see that the cost basis on Electrium Conductors is about 100 per MK3, right? And the same thing on the guild event tokens. That's obviously going to be the cheapest item out of these. You'll notice that I did not put Carbonite Circuitboards or any of the lower relics that do routinely show up. CG has very clearly made it obvious to us that they don't want us buying those items because the cost is a lot higher and doesn't actually make very much sense. My personal take on raid tokens and guild event tokens is buy any of these. Buy them based off of what you personally need. I personally am at a later point in the game. I am looking more for R9s, for GL grinds, for ROTE, for day 5 planets. I am typically investing in Gyrda Keypads as well as impulse detectors. When I find that I have enough of those, I am buying Electrium Conductors, I'm buying Zinbiddle Cards. Now here's kind of the system that I work on. I like to always have 40 Gyrda Keypads in reserve. Once I have 40 of those in reserve, I'm not as worried about those anymore because it's very rare that CG is going to ask me to, on a dime, relic more than 2 characters to relic 9, and if they do, I know that I'm going to have consistently multiple weeks to have to worry about it, and it won't be a big deal. I do like to buy impulse detectors to about 80 to 100, just because you're going to need those 80 to get those 2 R9s. And then after that, I am typically buying Zinbiddle Cards into however high I can get them, and Electrium Conductors however high I can get them. I did not forget the Aeromagnifiers, which are only available for raid tokens. I just personally haven't had a use case for buying them yet, and I do recognize that it's coming, and I do recognize that a lot of players need them. They absolutely are worth buying there. You can see that even a little bit higher priority maybe than those impulse detectors. So what I do suggest players do is they come up with a system that works for them, and they come up with a way that works for them for determining how many of each thing that they need in order to stay on top of the speed of acquisition that CG is demanding of them. So with all of that said, hopefully that helps. And I know after filming this, next month we're going to get Gyrda Keypads in the 500 crystal packs, and I'm gonna have to redo that, and that's cool. We'll figure out a cool way to bring up those tricks. But as a final reminder, Moonboard did do this mock-up of an infographic for us. It will most likely be available on Reddit. It will definitely be available on our Discord. You do not have to stop and pause and look and read and copy or whatever else. It'll be in the show notes and in the show description so that you can figure out and kind of keep that on your wayside without having to watch me over and over and over and over and over again. With all of that said, I hope that this helps you make the right decision in the game to bring yourself to the next level. And peace out.